guys, so I get a lot of questions about how I make my photos have transparent backgrounds in Photoshop, so that's what we're going to talk about today. So you're just going to go ahead and open your photo in Photoshop like you would any other photo. And then once that is open, the quickest way to do it is you're going to select your quick selection tool. Now Photoshop has gotten a lot more advanced in the past few years, and so you can go ahead and click the select subject tool in your top bar, and it usually does a pretty good job of selecting your subject accurately, but if not, I'm going to show you an alternative. So just like that, it selected it, and you might notice a few blemishes or places it added when it shouldn't have, or got rid of when it shouldn't have. And you can go ahead and just use the plus and minus brush keys in the top left corner and go in and add those spots back. And then if you're noticing it's not doing the thing you want, sometimes you just overthink it maybe, so just make sure you do have the right key selected. So if you're adding something, make sure you have the plus key, and if you're taking something away, you have the minus key. And then another thing I always like to do is I do zoom in quite a bit just to make sure that it is getting the outline completely, just so that you don't miss any of those little spots or add in anything that you don't want. But if you do, there are some ways to fix it, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. So the other way, so say you have like an inanimate object, or maybe you've got a lot of motion in a photo and it's just not getting your subjects correctly, is you can actually use the pen tool. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the pen tool, and you're just going to go along and click along the subject. Now if you notice, like it did on mine, that it has this sort of line, that means you have your stroke and shape on. So just go ahead and turn your stroke all the way down and change it from shape to path in the top bar again. And then along the way, if it is selecting things that you weren't ready for, or you just don't like how it's selected, you can go back to your quick selection tool, right click, and hit deselect. Now when you are using your pen tool again to outline these, you want to make sure you go with the curves of the subject or object, because if you place these dots too far apart, you are going to get these straight lines that aren't going to be very representative of what you want. So just keep going along, and obviously I'm doing this pretty quickly so that you guys don't have to sit here and watch me do this super tediously. My biggest tip along with this process of using the pen tool is just to take your time. If you get in a rush and you move too quickly, you are going to miss certain pieces. We want to make sure your image gets completely cut out. So just make sure you're taking your time with this, like I said, and going along with the curves. And I'm obviously doing this very quickly. I usually don't do it this fast in real time. When using the pen tool, it can also be kind of difficult when you have a lot of details. That's why I always start with my quick selection tool to see kind of where I'm coming from. And then I use my pen tool as a last resort. But just make sure, as long as you're being careful and you're thinking about it strategically of how you can connect that line, you will be able to use this tool. Now the other thing that's really important is this is basically a giant connect the dot. So if you don't connect the two dots at the end like I'm doing right now, your image is going to it's not going to connect properly, and so it won't cut out properly. So after you do that, you're going to right click and hit make selection, and then you'll notice there's a pixels number. That's going to allow the number of correction that it does for you. I usually put mine between 2 and 5. So now as you can see, I've got my image cut out, or I've selected it anyway. And those are the two methods that I use to select images. So I am going to go ahead and switch back to my select subject. Now the easiest way while this is loading, for me, that I have found to create transparent backgrounds is actually just to use my copy paste tools. So after I've selected my image and I fixed my blemishes, I'm going to go in and I'm going to hit, I'm going to use my keyboard functions. On my Mac it's Command C or Control C, whatever it is on your computer. And then I'm going to go over to my layers, and at the bottom I'm going to hit the plus and create a blank layer, and then I'm just going to paste that on. So I'm going to hit Command V. Now to turn off your background, you're just going to hit that little eyeball icon, and there you have it. Your image, it now has a transparent background. You may notice as I was hovering that there are some spots that it missed, so we're going to go in and fix those. The easiest way that I have found for these little spots is honestly just to use my quick selection tool again. So I'm going to zoom in as close as I can, and I would warn you to be very careful with the size of your brush here. This is an adaptive feature, so if you select it if your brush is too big, it is going to select more than you need. I'm just going to go in and I'm going to click in the middle of each of these holes and just hit my delete key. Now with this, you want to make sure you're deselecting after you correct each spot, otherwise it may be editing multiple parts of the photo at one time, and we just don't want it to alter anything that doesn't need to be altered. So again, I'm just going to scroll down and I'm going back to that helmet and zooming in and checking my brush size with the specific dimensions of the area that I'm looking at, and then again I'm just going to click in the middle, maybe drag a little bit, and hit my delete key. And then you can also use just the edge of your brush to go in and add like smaller details. Again, I would just warn you to be careful with that. If you're worried that you can't fit there completely without taking something out, just go ahead and minimize your brush size. And then like you saw there, I actually missed a little bit. I'm going to go back to that in a second and change my brush size and fix that. So you'll get to see how I do that, or how I judge that. So with smaller defined areas, I do want to zoom in pretty close just so I can be sure. And then I always want to make my brush a little bit smaller than the area it actually needs to fit, just so that I make sure I don't hurt anything on the sides of that image, and I allow it some leeway to fill in those holes. And then I also want to point out, be aware of the backgrounds of what your person is leaning on. So as you can see here, I've got a little bit of perforation from that grass he was leaning on. You can fix it with your quick selection tool or your clone or your heel brush, however you want to. For me, this is okay because this is just a practice image, so I'm not going to go through that. You should know how to use those tools already. But make sure you check out another video if you have any questions about that. Now, the other thing is you want to make sure you export this. So when you're saving, you're going to go to File, obviously, and then Export. If you do a save as, that's not going to give you a transparent background, so we want to make sure that we go to Export and then Export As, and it's going to open this little prompt window. You will have to wait for your photo to load before you can set any of your presets, but once that does happen, you will be able to select between like PNG and JPEG, and I think there's a couple of other options. And then you also want to make sure that you have that transparency box selected. If you do not, it again will not have a transparent background. And then you can scroll down and select all of your other saving information, your image size, your canvas size, what have you. And then you will have to wait again while it uploads those changes. And then you will notice that you can now hit the export button. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And then you'll save it just like normal. You can title it whatever you want. I'm going to call this one Transparent. And let's do number 26, because that's who this guy is. And I'm going to save it to wherever you want. And then sometimes it takes a while just to cut out that background. Just give it a second. It will kick through. And then before I close anything in my Photoshop, I always want to make sure it's saved the correct way that I want it to. So I'm actually going to go back to my desktop where I had this saved and open that just to make sure it's there. And there you go. Now you've got an image with a transparent background. Thank you guys so much for watching.